$218,000. That's what it cost to fix what she knew about and never told me. Not what I paid for the house, not the down payment, not the closing costs or the inspection fee or the moving truck I rented on a Tuesday in June because it was $40 cheaper than Saturday. $218,000 is what it cost 3 years later to fix a problem that existed the entire time she owned that house, a problem she watched grow, a problem she paid a contractor in cash to patch over, a problem she buried under fresh paint and a strategically placed bookshelf 2 weeks before she put the property on the market. She signed a legal disclosure form swearing she had no knowledge of any structural defects. She was lying when the pen touched the paper. I want you to sit with that for a second, because if you've ever bought a house or you're about to, this is the story that's going to change how you read every single document they hand you at a closing table. This is the story of a woman named Denise Halloran, a house on a quiet street in a good school district, a crack in a basement wall the width of a credit card, and the 18 months I spent turning myself into an amateur forensic investigator because nobody else was going to do it for me. They thought they got away with it. They were wrong. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a seller hides a structural defect from a buyer, the tricks, the timing, the paperwork tells, and exactly how I built a case that ended not just in a 6-figure settlement, but in a public records disclosure that follows Denise Halloran's name on every title search done in that county for the rest of her life. You're going to see the inspection report. You're going to see the text messages. You're going to see the moment the general contractor she paid under the table finally broke and told the truth. This isn't a story about bad luck. This is a story about a woman who made a calculated bet that I wouldn't look closely enough. She lost that bet, and I'm going to walk you through every step of how. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this channel is about exactly one thing: real financial fraud told in detail, and what it actually takes to get your money back when someone with more resources and more confidence thinks they can outmaneuver you. Today's story is about greed, betrayal, and getting every single dollar back, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus a level of public accountability most fraud victims never get to see. If that's the kind of story you come here for, hit subscribe, because we do this every week, and the case files only get more detailed from here. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand how thoroughly I got played, you need to understand exactly who I was the day I walked into that house for the first time. In the spring I bought that house, I was 34 years old. I'd just gotten a promotion that came with a real signing bonus for the first time in my life, and I had exactly one goal: stop renting. I'd done the math 100 times. Rent was money that vanished into a landlord's pocket every month with nothing to show for it. A mortgage was money that built equity, that built a future, that meant something. I had a pre-approval letter from my bank for $410,000. I had a down payment saved, not huge, but real, about $52,000, money I'd been putting away since I was 26. I was what any realtor would call a motivated, qualified, first-time buyer. I want to be honest with you about something, because this channel doesn't do the version of these stories where the narrator is flawless. I was in a hurry. My lease was ending in 10 weeks. I'd already lost 2 houses to bidding wars that summer, both times outbid by buyers waiving inspection contingencies entirely, a practice that, if you're house hunting right now, I want you to remember I'm about to tell you is dangerous, because it's exactly the kind of market pressure that predatory sellers count on. By the time I found the house on Ashford Lane, I was tired of losing, tired of month-to-month lease extensions, tired of watching other buyers get keys while I got rejection emails. And tired is exactly the emotional state a seller like Denise Halloran is looking for. The listing photos were beautiful, craftsman style, built in 1998, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, a backyard with mature oak trees that the listing described as a private retreat. Asking price was $438,000, already below the neighborhood average, which the listing agent explained was because Denise was motivated to relocate closer to family in Arizona. I want you to remember that detail, motivated to relocate, because it's going to matter enormously later. I saw the house on a Thursday evening. Denise was there, which is unusual. Most sellers clear out during showings. She met me at the door with a glass of iced tea already poured, like she'd been expecting me specifically, even though I was one of 6 scheduled showings that day. She was warm, disarmingly warm. She told me she and her late husband had built most of the finished basement themselves, that they raised 2 kids in that house, that she cried a little every time she thought about selling it. She said, and I remember this almost word for word, "I just want it to go to someone who'll actually take care of it, not an investor who's going to flip it and never live here." That's a trust-building script. I didn't recognize it as one at the time. I recognized it as sincerity, because grief is one of the most convincing performances a person can give, whether it's real or manufactured, and I had no way of knowing which one I was looking at.
Here's where it gets specific, because this is the moment the fraud actually began. Not later, not at the disclosure form, right here, in a basement on a Thursday in April. The finished basement had a family room, a small home office, and a laundry area. Along the far wall behind a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf loaded with photo albums and paperback novels was a section of foundation wall that, I would learn 18 months later, had an active, worsening, horizontal crack behind it, the kind of crack that structural engineers will tell you is one of the most serious signs of foundation failure a house can display, far more dangerous than the vertical hairline cracks most homeowners panic over for no reason. Denise had positioned that bookshelf against that wall roughly 2 weeks before listing the house. I know that now because of a next-door post I'd eventually find, time-stamped, where a neighbor commented on Denise's yard sale of book stuff, and Denise replied that she was finally getting rid of that backroom clutter before the house goes on the market. That bookshelf wasn't decor, it was a stage prop. She also had a dehumidifier running in the corner, and when I commented on the slightly musty basement smell, she laughed and said, "Ohio basements, right? Can't win." A joke, a deflection, a completely normal thing for anyone to say, which is exactly why it worked. I nodded and moved on. I didn't know that a musty smell in a finished basement can be one of the earliest indicators of water intrusion through a compromised foundation wall, water that, over years, erodes the integrity of poured concrete and accelerates exactly the kind of horizontal cracking hiding behind those bookshelves. I hired an inspector I found through a friend's recommendation, a reasonably well-reviewed local guy, not a national chain, seemed thorough on paper. He spent about 2.5 hours at the house. His report flagged some minor electrical panel issues, an aging water heater, and recommended gutter cleaning. Nothing about the foundation beyond a single line. No visible cracking or bowing observed in accessible foundation walls at time of inspection. Accessible. That word is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, and I didn't understand it at the time. My inspector never moved that bookshelf. He never asked to. Home inspectors generally are not obligated to move furniture, shift stored items, or use invasive methods to access every inch of a foundation wall. That's a limitation of a standard visual inspection, and it's one that a seller who knows what she's doing can exploit with something as simple as 40 pounds of hardcover novels. I want to pause here and give you the first real piece of practical advice in this video, because I promised you educational value, and I meant it. If a room in a house you're buying has furniture pushed flush against an exterior or foundation wall, especially in a basement, ask, directly, explicitly, for it to be moved before the inspection. It costs you an awkward conversation. It might save you $200,000. I didn't know to ask. I was 34, exhausted from 2 failed bids, and holding a glass of iced tea a grieving widow had poured for me with her own hands. A few days after the inspection, my agent sent over the seller's property disclosure statement, a legally binding document required in most states where the seller attests under penalty of perjury to known material defects. I read it. I remember reading it, actually, more carefully than most buyers probably do,
because I'd read horror stories online about people who skipped this step. Under structural systems, next to the line asking whether the seller had any knowledge of any past or present movement, shifting, deterioration, or other problems with walls or foundations, the box checked was no. Denise Holleran signed that form on May 3rd. I found out later, and we'll get to exactly how I found this out, that 11 months before she signed that form, she had paid a contractor $4,200 in cash to apply a cosmetic epoxy injection to that same wall, a patch job specifically designed to stop visible seepage without addressing the structural cause, and that the contractor had told her in plain language, according to his own later testimony, that the crack indicated foundation movement and that she needed a structural engineer, not a cosmetic fix. She thanked him, paid him in cash, so there'd be no invoice with his company's letterhead describing structural movement, and never called an engineer. That's not an oversight. That's not something that fell through the cracks, no pun intended. That is a documented, deliberate choice to conceal a known defect from a future buyer made almost a full year before I ever set foot in that house. We closed on June 21st. I remember the date because it was the summer solstice, and my agent made a joke about it being the longest day for the longest commitment of your life, which felt charming at the time and feels almost cruelly ironic now. I wired $52,800 for my down payment and closing costs. I signed 40-some pages of documents, most of which I skimmed, all of which I now have memorized because my lawyer and I would spend the next year and a half combing through every clause. Denise Holleran walked away from that closing table with a check for just under $410,000 in proceeds after paying off her existing mortgage. She had, at that point, successfully transferred a known, actively worsening structural defect onto a first-time buyer, collected full market value for a house with a compromised foundation, and signed a legal document swearing she'd done nothing of the sort. I moved my furniture in 3 weeks later. I had no idea what was waiting behind that bookshelf, which, I should mention, Denise had left behind as a housewarming gift, she said, since you'll need somewhere to put books eventually.
She left the bookshelf in the exact spot, on purpose. For about 14 months, nothing seemed wrong. I painted the upstairs bedrooms, replaced the aging water heater my inspector had flagged, and genuinely loved that house. I hosted a Thanksgiving there. I thought, more than once, that I'd finally done something right. The first sign came in August of the following year, during a stretch of unusually heavy rain that hit our region for almost 2 weeks straight. I went downstairs to grab a book off that bookshelf, the same one Denise had left behind, and noticed the carpet near the baseboard was damp. Not soaked, just damp, in a way that made me stop and crouch down and press my palm flat against it. I moved a few books aside. Nothing looked obviously wrong at first glance, but when I finally pulled the whole bookshelf away from the wall, because I wanted to check if water was coming in from underneath it, I saw the crack. It wasn't small. It ran horizontally across nearly 4 feet of the foundation wall, at roughly waist height, and in the center of it, the wall had begun to visibly bow inward, maybe half an inch, maybe more. There was a faint white mineral crust along the lower edge, what's called efflorescence, a telltale sign of long-term water migration through concrete, and the drywall behind where the bookshelf had sat was soft enough that my thumb left an indentation when I pressed it. I remember standing there in my socks in 8 inches of dim basement light, feeling something click into place that I couldn't yet name. It wasn't just alarm. It was a specific, cold recognition. This didn't happen in 14 months. I called a structural engineer the next morning, not a general contractor, an actual licensed structural engineer, because by this point, some instinct told me I needed someone whose opinion would hold up if this went further than my own basement. His name was Raymond Ortiz, and he'd later become one of the single most important people in this entire story.
He came out 4 days later, spent nearly 2 hours in that basement with a laser level, a crack monitor gauge, and a moisture meter, and then he sat down with me at my kitchen table and told me something that changed the entire trajectory of my life for the next year and a half. He said the crack pattern, horizontal with visible inward bowing, was consistent with hydrostatic pressure damage that had been developing, in his professional estimate, for at least 3 to 5 years. He said the bowing degree suggested it was not a recent event, and that based on the mineral deposits and the degree of wall displacement, a reasonable engineer looking at this wall would estimate the earliest visible symptoms, cracking, minor seepage, began well before I ever purchased the home. He also said something I wrote down word for word, because I somehow already knew I'd need it later. Whoever owned this house before you almost certainly saw evidence of this. A crack this size doesn't appear overnight, and water intrusion at this stage doesn't happen without visible staining or smell for years beforehand. I sat at my kitchen table and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. Raymond's written report, and I want to be specific here because numbers matter, estimated that full remediation would require carbon fiber wall reinforcement or steel I-beam bracing across the affected wall, excavation and waterproofing on the exterior side of the foundation, interior drainage system installation, and, depending on how far the displacement had progressed, potential wall replacement rather than reinforcement if engineering standards weren't met. His preliminary estimate, $140,000 to $190,000, not accounting for finishing repairs, drywall, flooring, the rebuilt home office, which would eventually push the real total to $218,000 once all the work was actually completed years later. I remember doing the math against my savings, my salary, my mortgage payment, and understanding with total clarity that I could not pay for this myself, not without selling the house at a catastrophic loss, not without going into debt that would follow me for a decade. I also understood, sitting at that table, that this was not a story about an unlucky house. This was a story about a decision someone else had made. I did what I think most people would do first. I tried to handle it like a reasonable adult having a reasonable conversation. I found Denise Holleran's phone number, which I still had from a single logistical text during closing about garage door remotes, and I called her. She was pleasant at first, sympathetic even. She said she was so sorry to hear that old houses do that sometimes, and that she genuinely had no idea there was ever an issue with that wall. I asked her directly, had she ever noticed any cracking, any water, anything at all in that basement during the years she owned the home? She said no, flatly, warmly even, like she was doing me a favor by being so calm about my accusation. I promise you, she said, if I'd known about something like that, I would have told you. I'm not that kind of person. I believed her for about 11 more days. My lawyer, and yes, at this point I had already retained one, a real estate litigation attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran, who I'll talk more about shortly, advised me to request Denise's home improvement and repair records for the property, which, because the house was under warranty transfer for one appliance, we were legally entitled to request through the closing title company's request process. Buried in a stack of paperwork was a single line item on an old home warranty claim, unrelated to the foundation, that referenced a contracting company called Baxter Basement Solutions, doing minor cosmetic work at the property roughly 14 months before the sale. I called Baxter Basement Solutions myself, cold, no lawyer on the line, just me and a notepad. The man who answered, later identified as the company owner, Dale Baxter, was immediately cagey. He confirmed he'd done work at an address on Ashford Lane, but said he didn't remember the details and that it was just a small cosmetic job, nothing major. I asked him directly, did the job involve a foundation wall crack? He paused for what felt like a full 10 seconds, and then said he'd have to check his records, and hung up. He never called back. That pause told me almost everything I needed to know. Innocent people don't need 10 seconds and a records check about a job they claim to barely remember. Over the following weeks, as my attorney and I started formally building a case, we uncovered the mechanics of exactly how Denise Valerian had covered this up, piece by piece. And I want to walk you through each layer, because this is the part of the story that turns from unfortunate coincidence into documented, provable fraud. Layer 1, the cash payment. Dale Baxter's company, we'd later confirmed through subpoenaed bank records, had no invoice, no contract, and no documented transaction with Denise Valerian anywhere in their official books for that period. The $4,200 payment had been made in cash. Specifically, we came to believe, to avoid leaving a paper trail that would surface during a future title search or disclosure audit. Layer 2, the staging, the bookshelf. The timing of its placement, corroborated by the next door post, put it directly against that wall roughly 2 weeks before the listing went live, not years earlier as ordinary furniture placement, but freshly repositioned, deliberately, right before showings began. Layer 3, the disclosure form itself. A sworn legal document checked no on structural defects, signed 11 months after she'd been personally told by a contractor that the wall showed signs of structural movement requiring an engineer. Layer 4, the verbal reassurance. With performance at the initial showing, the grief, the warmth, I just wanted to go to someone who would take care of it, wasn't necessarily calculated as fraud in a legal sense on its own, but combined with everything else, it painted a picture of someone actively managing my perception of her trustworthiness while sitting on information that would have changed my decision entirely. And that's when I found the smoking gun. It wasn't the bookshelf, it wasn't even the cash payment, though that would matter enormously later. It was a text message. During discovery, the formal legal process where both sides in a lawsuit are compelled to exchange relevant evidence, my attorney requested electronic communications between Denise Halloran and any contractor or repair service related to the Ashford Lane property going back 5 years. Denise's own phone records, pulled under a discovery subpoena, contained a text exchange with Dale Baxter dated roughly 11 months before closing. In it, Baxter wrote, and this is to the word what appeared in the produced evidence, "Like I said, the crack behind your bookshelf is a structural thing, not just cosmetic. Epoxy will stop the seep for now, but you really should get an engineer out there before it gets worse or before you sell." Denise's reply, 3 minutes later, "Let's just do the epoxy for now. Thanks, Dale." I remember exactly where I was when my attorney read that text to me over the phone. I was standing in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where Raymond Ortiz had told me the wall had likely been failing for years, and I had to sit down on the floor because my legs genuinely did not feel steady enough to hold me. There it was, in writing, from her own phone. Explicit acknowledgement of a structural issue, an explicit warning that it should be disclosed or addressed before you sell, and an explicit choice to do the cheapest possible cosmetic fix instead. She hadn't just failed to disclose a defect she was unsure about. She had been told in plain English that it was structural. She had been told in plain English to deal with it before selling, and she had chosen deliberately in writing to paper over it and sell the house 11 months later while swearing under legal penalty that she had no knowledge of any such thing. This wasn't negligence. This was fraud. I want to be honest about something most of these videos gloss over. The legal system does not do this work for you. Nobody was going to knock on my door and hand me Denise Halloran's text messages. I had to become functionally an amateur forensic investigator in my own life, and I want to walk you through exactly how that process worked, because if you're ever in this position, this is the roadmap. The first thing I did, before I even called a lawyer, was start a physical binder. Every conversation, every date, every name, every dollar amount written down the same day it happened, because memory degrades and a contemporaneous written record holds up in court in a way that I think it was sometime in August never will. The second thing I did was pull public records. County property records showed the full ownership history of the house, previous sale prices, and, critically, permit history. I discovered that no permits had ever been pulled for foundation work at that address, which told me one of two things. Either no significant foundation work had ever been done, or it had been done specifically without a permit, which is common when a homeowner is trying to avoid creating an official record. I interviewed 3 real estate litigation attorneys before choosing Priya Chandrasekaran, a partner at a mid-sized firm specializing in real property fraud and non-disclosure claims. What made me choose her wasn't a sales pitch. It was that in our first consultation, she asked for my binder before she asked for a retainer check. She wanted to see the paper trail before she'd even estimate whether I had a viable case. Her initial assessment, I likely had grounds for a claim of fraudulent concealment and breach of statutory disclosure obligations, legal terms that matter here because they're distinct from simple negligence and they carry different remedies. In most states, a seller isn't just liable for what they should have known through reasonable diligence. If you can prove they had actual, specific knowledge of a defect and deliberately concealed it, you open the door to remedies well beyond simple repair cost reimbursement, including, in some jurisdictions, punitive damages designed specifically to punish deliberate deception rather than just make the victim whole. Priya's retainer was $7,500, with an understanding that a contingency-adjacent fee structure would apply to any settlement above a certain threshold. It felt like an enormous amount of money to spend on top of a foundation I couldn't afford to fix, but I'd already done enough of my own digging to believe I wasn't looking at bad luck. I was looking at a paper trail, and I needed someone with subpoena power to pull the rest of it. Priya's first move was a formal demand letter sent to Denise Halloran and, once we identified her, her homeowner's title insurance carrier, outlining the engineer's report, the estimated repair costs, and a demand for compensation under the state's residential property disclosure statute. The response, through an attorney Denise had quickly retained, was a flat denial. Her position formally stated that she had no knowledge of any structural defect at the time of sale, that any current damage could have developed after closing due to the new owner's own maintenance failures, and that the claim was, in their words, speculative and without merit. This is an extremely common playbook, and I want to name it clearly for anyone watching who might be facing something similar. Deny, deflect blame on the buyer's post-purchase behavior, and bet that the cost and difficulty of building a fraud case will make the buyer give up. It almost worked in the sense that it was genuinely exhausting. There were weeks that fall where I seriously considered just taking out a home equity loan and eating the cost, because the alternative, a drawn-out legal fight against someone who'd already shown she was willing to lie under oath, felt like it might cost me more in stress than it would ever recover in dollars. What kept me going was Raymond Ortiz's engineering report and that at least 3 to 5 years estimate, because if that estimate held up, Denise's claim that the damage developed after I bought the house wasn't just wrong, it was mathematically impossible. Once the case moved into formal discovery, the phase where both sides can compel document production and depositions, the picture accelerated fast. We subpoenaed Denise Halloran's full text message and email history related to Baxter Basement Solutions, Baxter Basement Solutions' complete financial and job records for the relevant time period, any home warranty claims filed on the property during Denise's ownership, and neighborhood social media posts and comments referencing the property, sourced through public search and formally authenticated. The text messages I described earlier came from this subpoena process. So did something else almost as important, Baxter's own internal job log, a battered paper notebook he kept in his truck, produced under subpoena, which included a handwritten entry, dated correctly, reading simply, Halloran, Ashford, basement crack epoxy, cash, $4,200, told her needs engineer. Those last 4 words,
told her needs engineer, written by Dale Baxter himself in his own hand in his own contemporaneous business log 11 months before the sale, became one of the single most damaging pieces of evidence in the entire case. And that's when I found the smoking gun, the second one really, because at this point the case had more than one. Depositions are sworn testimony taken under oath outside of a courtroom, and they are transcribed word for word. Lying in a deposition carries the same legal weight and the same perjury exposure as lying on the witness stand. Denise Halloran was deposed on a Tuesday in February, roughly 10 months into the process. My attorney walked her methodically through the disclosure form, the timeline, and finally the text messages. When confronted directly with the text where Baxter told her the crack was a structural thing, her sworn answer, and this is close to verbatim from the transcript, was that she didn't remember that conversation specifically, and that she'd trusted Dale to just fix whatever needed fixing.
Priya's follow-up question, in my opinion, is the single most important moment of the entire case. Ms. Halloran, do you recall signing a disclosure statement on May 3rd stating you had no knowledge of any structural issues with the property? Yes. And is it your testimony today that 11 months earlier, you received a text message explicitly telling you the wall crack was structural and recommending you consult an engineer before selling, but you have no memory of that at all? There was a long pause in the transcript. The court reporter actually notated it as witness pauses before Denise answered, "I may have seen it. I didn't think it was a big deal." That single sentence, "I may have seen it. I didn't think it was a big deal," was, in Priya's professional assessment, close to a functional admission, not a full confession, but a sworn statement under oath, acknowledging she had, at minimum, seen a warning about a structural defect before signing a legal document swearing she had no such knowledge. I want to tell you about the moment this case almost fell apart, because it's the part of the story that made me understand how close deliberate fraud can come to simply working. Denise's insurance-appointed defense attorney made a settlement offer roughly a month after the deposition, $38,000, framed as a good faith gesture to resolve the matter without further litigation costs on either side. It was less than a fifth of what full remediation would actually cost, and for about 4 days, I genuinely considered taking it, because Priya was honest with me that litigation could stretch on for another year, that trials are unpredictable regardless of how strong your evidence feels, and that legal fees would keep accumulating regardless of outcome. What changed my mind was something almost embarrassingly small. I went down to the basement one more time, stood in front of that wall, now visibly bowing further than it had been 6 months earlier, and thought about the fact that Denise Halloran had, in her own handwriting adjacent evidence trail, been warned about exactly this outcome, and chosen, in writing, to hide it rather than spend a fraction of what it would eventually cost me. I called Priya back the next morning and told her I wasn't settling for a number that didn't even cover the engineering report, let alone the actual repair. I told her I wanted to go the distance, and if that meant trial, I wanted to go to trial. That decision is what ultimately forced the real number to the table. Once it became clear I wasn't going to accept a lowball figure, and once Denise's own deposition testimony was on the record acknowledging she'd seen the structural warning, their defense team calculus changed considerably. A jury presented with a signed disclosure form, a text message explicitly warning of structural damage, a sworn deposition testimony admitting she may have seen that warning, was not a jury their insurance carrier wanted to gamble in front of. Priya filed formal notice of intent to proceed to trial, along with an amended damages claim that now included not just the repair estimate, but consequential damages, the cost of alternative housing during remediation, diminished property value pending repair, legal fees, and, under our state's applicable statute for fraudulent concealment in real estate transactions, the potential for treble damages, meaning damages multiplied as a penalty for proven deliberate fraud rather than simple negligence. That last part is the piece that moved everything. Insurance carriers do not like exposure to punitive multipliers. 6 weeks after we filed notice of intent to proceed, we received a revised settlement offer. $218,000, plus a separate payment of $24,000 covering accumulated legal fees, structured as a lump sum settlement, with a formal admission clause acknowledging that the seller failed to disclose known material defects in the property disclosure statement. That admission clause mattered to me almost as much as the money. It meant this wasn't quietly disappearing into a confidential settlement where Denise Holleran got to keep telling people forever that this was all a misunderstanding. Because part of my agreement with my attorney from the very beginning was that I wanted transparency wherever legally possible. We ensured the settlement, while including standard confidentiality around the exact negotiation details, still resulted in a formal court filing documenting the fraudulent concealment claim and its resolution. A filing that is part of the permanent public court record in that county to this day. That matters for a very specific, practical reason. Property disclosure fraud claims, once part of the public court record, can surface in future background searches, professional licensing reviews if the seller is ever a licensed real estate professional or contractor, and, because I made absolutely certain of this, appear in any future title search or civil litigation history search run on Denise Holleran. I'm not going to pretend that felt like nothing to me. It felt like something. It felt like the difference between quietly getting my money back and ensuring that the next person who does business with her has a fighting chance of knowing what happened here. Dale Baxter faced a separate consequence entirely, because his own subpoenaed business records revealed a pattern of undocumented cash transactions, not just with Denise, but once investigators started looking, with at least 2 other property owners in similar circumstances. His case was referred to the state's contractor licensing board. He ultimately received a formal licensing board citation for failure to maintain adequate business records and was required to complete a compliance review before his contractor's license was reinstated in good standing. He was not criminally charged, but his business, according to public reviews I checked roughly a year later, saw a visible drop in local reputation once his name became associated publicly with the case. Here's the twist I promised you at the start of this video, and it's the detail that honestly still sits strangely with me even now. During discovery, we obtained partial financial records related to Denise's proceeds from the original sale of the Ashford Lane property, the $410,000 she walked away with. A significant portion of that money, it turned out, had not gone toward relocating closer to family in Arizona at all, or at least not entirely. Bank records subpoenaed as part of the broader fraud claim showed that roughly $180,000 of her proceeds had gone toward paying off debts related to a previous, unrelated business venture, a small chain of retail stores that had quietly failed 2 years before she sold the house. In other words, the sale of that house and the concealment of its foundation defect wasn't just an act of general dishonesty. It was, in significant part, financially necessary to her. She needed the full, undiscounted market value of that house to climb out of an unrelated financial hole, and a disclosed structural defect, which would have knocked tens of thousands of dollars off the sale price at minimum, and possibly scared off buyers entirely, stood directly in the way of that number. She wasn't just careless with the truth. She had a specific financial incentive to lie, and she acted on it, and for a while it worked. The settlement funds covered the full structural remediation, steel I-beam reinforcement across the compromised wall, complete exterior excavation and waterproofing, a new interior drainage system, and the rebuilt basement office and flooring. Raymond Ortiz signed off on the completed repair with a follow-up inspection roughly 5 months after work began, confirming the wall had been fully stabilized and no further movement had been detected in over 90 days of monitoring. I also want to be honest about the part of this that isn't about money. For most of that 18-month process, I genuinely struggled to trust my own judgment about people. I'd been charmed deliberately by someone who had every intention of letting me buy a house with a hidden structural time bomb in it. That's not a small thing to sit with. It changes how you read warmth from strangers for a while. What helped, honestly, was channeling that into vigilance rather than paranoia. On every major purchase since, a car, a second property I looked at and ultimately didn't buy for entirely unrelated reasons, I've built a habit of asking pointed, specific, sometimes uncomfortable questions and treating any hesitation in someone's answer as data worth pursuing rather than something to politely ignore. So here's what I want to leave you with, because if you've made it this far, you clearly care about not becoming the next person telling this story. Warning sign 1. Furniture, shelving, or decor pushed flush against foundation or basement walls, especially if it looks recently placed. Ask for it to be moved before your inspection, every time, no exceptions. Warning sign 2. A seller who is present and unusually warm during a showing, especially one who volunteers emotional context, grief, nostalgia, I just want the right person to have it. That can be completely genuine. It can also be a script. Don't let warmth substitute for documentation.
Warning sign 3. Musty smells, staining or efflorescence, that white mineral crust, anywhere near a foundation wall. These are classic signs of long-term water intrusion, and they're often the first thing a seller tries to mask, whether with paint, dehumidifiers, or air freshener. Warning sign 4. A disclosure form that seems suspiciously clean. Every no box checked on a house that's more than 15 or 20 years old should prompt at least a little healthy skepticism, not blind trust. And here's the most important piece of practical advice I can give you. Request permit history from your county records office before you close. It's public, it's free or close to it, and it tells you what work was and wasn't officially done on a property, which can reveal exactly the kind of gap I found after the fact. If you're currently in a dispute like this, a seller who hid something, an inspection that missed something it shouldn't have, start your paper trail today, not next week. Write down dates while they're fresh. Get a licensed structural engineer's written opinion, not just a verbal one, and talk to a real estate litigation attorney early, even if it feels expensive, because the cost of a consultation is nothing compared to the cost of a foundation nobody warned you about. Have you been scammed like this? Has a seller, a contractor, or anyone else tried to bury a problem under a fresh coat of paint and hope you didn't look too closely? Tell me what happened in the comments. I read every one, and some of the strongest cases I've ever covered on this channel started as a comment on a video just like this one. If this story was worth your time, subscribe, because next week's case involves a used car dealership, an odometer that didn't add up, and a buyer who happened to work in data forensics. I'll see you then.